Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our diversity webinar this morning. We will just wait a minute or so while everyone joins, and then we will kick off. You can just see a few people joining as we wait. Throughout the webinar today, you will be able to ask any questions. So if anything pops up along the way, feel free to use the Q&A button, and we will try to answer those questions as we go. But there will also be an opportunity at the end to ask any questions that come up. We've just still got a few more people joining, and then we'll kick off. Good to see so many of you joining us on a rainy Thursday morning. Well, it's rainy here in Auckland, so maybe a little nicer in the rest of the country. Well, I think we'll kick off. So thanks again, everyone, for joining this morning. I'm Natalie, one of the relationship managers, and we have Ali, who is our reporting specialist, and Daniela from our client success team joining us today. I'll pass over to Daniela now, and we can kick off this diversity webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, Nat, and thank you everyone for joining. So today we're excited to talk to you about diversity and how you can capture some diversity information within SnapHire, and then thinking about what you will actually kind of do with that information once you've captured it in the system. So just in terms of kind of an agenda for today, we're going to talk about kind of what diversity involves. So as you know, it's being inclusive in your recruitment is what we're talking about with regards to SnapHire. And thinking about commonly captured diversity information. So quite commonly we see date of birth, gender and ethnicity as the most common diversity questions asked within SnapHire. We also will talk about considering things like candidates' titles, personal pronouns, and then people with disabilities, how you can help them during the application process. And we're also going to talk about why should we be capturing this information or considering this information, how to ensure diversity is encouraged throughout the application process, how to measure diversity throughout the application process. So Ali will talk on that in regards to reporting and what some clients are doing, and how SnapHire can help. So you can configure this setup within your system, what's kind of the best practice, and again, what is clean reporting. So I'm going to pass over to Ali and take you through some slides now.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Nat. Hi, everybody. And like the other guys said, thanks for joining us today. There's a lot to get your head around when you start talking about diversity, start talking about EEO questions, start talking about who are the people who you are attracting as candidates and would-be hires. So where I'd like to start is to highlight that this is a process that does require some very careful considerations before you go down this path. Up front, there are obviously privacy ramifications. So whenever you do ask personal information of your candidates, keep in the back of your mind that it's best to have a solid business case for what you're asking for, and for retaining that information. You have to perhaps consider, is this a nice to have? Or is this a requirement for your KPIs? There's a lot of different reasons why people come at EO data collection, where they come from, and it's worth taking time to be clear as to why you are doing it. And obviously, careful planning at this stage does make the difference between having successful data collection, which can lead to some real insights and some real gains for your business. On the flip side, if you don't do it well, you can have a very messy and quite cumbersome, and at the same time, it also can put off a lot of your applicants. So it acts as an extra barrier and stop some of that candidate behavior that you're really trying to encourage. But if we move to the next slide, the first thing I want to say is, why is this data needed? And that's kind of obvious in some ways, but it's wise to consider, what are the business decisions that are going to be made using this data? Or if you can't answer that, think about, who is it that wants to know? Is it your CEO? Is it your I don't know,
a board, for example?
Yeah, or is it just one of your recruiters who says perhaps this is going to kind of cool? There's different things, you know. For example, you could be promoting your gender ratios throughout the recruitment process. It could be because you have measurements against set KPIs that you need that information. And we also have a lot of clients who just use it as an extra dimension to their overall recruitment analysis. They slot it into their Power BI slides, and it can really add some depth and some insight.
So to your point there, sorry to interrupt, Ali, but to your point there, it's not being used as a screening tool, but rather in these other spaces that you mentioned, which is great. And some people, you know, for the Power BI example, that extra dimension is really useful for kind of those people higher up in the business to see what you're doing in this space, and with regards to your applications. So that can all come from SnapHire.
Yeah. There's a lot of things you just want. Why do you want this data? Is it to focus on your highest profiles, or do you want to widen the net and have this information across all applicants? The next slide sort of keeps going along these sorts of things. You know, is it a question of ensuring appropriate gender ratios throughout that recruitment process, or is it because you want to encourage and support gender diversity? That is a different thing. You know, another way of tilting the same story is it a better understanding of your recruitment weaknesses when it comes to minority populations? Are there minority populations that you are not seeing in your business because of things that happen in that recruitment process that the data can highlight? It keeps on going. I can keep doing this. Do you want to feed back into the recruitment process to widen your net for quality applicants? So do you want to use your data to see who you're not attracting? You can go one step further back again and consider, are the advertisements you're putting out there inherently biased? So are you not even attracting a full spectrum of applicants before you start that recruitment process? I guess I'm just talking here, but I could put this into some sort of level of context. On one hand, a government department may have a requirement to have an employee profile reflective of the general population. So then there is a real relevance to having a long list of ethnicity options for candidates to choose from. But if your situation is different to that, if you have a situation where your business is simply targeting Māori and Pacifica populations because you know they are not adequately represented and it is important for your company to rectify that, then your questions need to be built around that. So yeah.
That's a good point, really good point, Sally. And I guess on this slide here where we've asked, you know, how do you include this without making the application process harder and longer? Like you've said, it's considering, you know, how many options do you want to have available to your candidates? You don't want to have these lengthy screens for them to have to go through with all these different questions. I guess it's condensing that information, wording it to your types of candidates, and then also the option there that these questions aren't even mandatory. So they can just bypass it if they don't feel like they want to contribute it in this space. Of course, that doesn't help your reporting, but it is still important to give candidates that option there.
I think as well, also touching on that is, where in your recruitment process do you want to capture this information? Do you want to know about everyone, and so it's at the application, or is it you only really want to know information about those people that have been hired? So do you capture that further down the process, or you know, do you only want to know about those candidates that have been interviewed onwards? So it's really sort of targeting what you're trying to achieve by asking those questions.
If we go to the next slide, Danny. what I realized when I put this slide together is that there's two ways of looking at data. You can say, I want this data to answer questions, which would be like, what is the gender ratio for hires across the different business departments? Or you can say, we want this data to ask the questions, such as perhaps, why does the proportion of Asian applicants decrease disproportionately as the recruitment process progresses? So you can use your data. I guess where I'm coming from, and I'm so enthusiastic about data, so that's why I talk like this, is that there's so many things you can do with it. There's so many things it can help you with, but you need to know what you want that help with. Do you want to ask the questions? Do you want to answer the questions? And even when you choose one or the other, you'll find that you're doing both. So now that I've complicated matters by saying, consider what your needs are, I would like to perhaps move through and show you a little bit more about the reports that we can offer you to help you understand what the data is telling you at these various parts of your recruitment process. So the next, well, thanks, Danny. We have a whole range of standard EEO slides. That's how I term them. And I'm just going to show you a few examples here so that you can get a little bit of an understanding of the types of things that we can do for you. Now, in every situation, we approach our reporting at SnapHire by saying this is what we offer as a standard offering. But of course, all of our clients are so very different from one another. So in each case, we tend to tweak it according to what you want. So when you look at these slides, you might go, but that's not for us. That's fine. But this is for somebody, and we can make something like this work for you. So please just don't hesitate to start the conversation. This one here, applications by ethnicity. It's a simple profile of candidates. I think the key thing I'd like to highlight with this is that there is an importance to building your questions so you can get the best out of your reporting. So if you offer candidates the opportunity to answer a single select answer, you will get much cleaner data than if you say to a candidate, which ethnicities do you ascribe to? So this is clean data, what we have in front of us. But if we were able to let somebody say, oh, I'm a New Zealand European, I'm also affiliated to this
Japanese.
Yeah, and so on and so forth. You can see that the data is going to get really messy. So the next chart is another illustration. Danny, I need you to click, please. Yes. And this illustrates us one of the downsides of equal employment questions, and that is that they are optional. So there are stages within your recruitment process where you cannot force anyone to answer these questions. And I mean, that's pretty clear to all of us. And that will mean that there can be chunks of data where the information is not clear. So there are different ways of approaching this, and there are a number of clients who recapture this information at a later stage in the application process, say Nick was saying, at interview bucket or at hire. So you can get cleaner information as you progress through the recruitment progress. Now, there's one more chart that I want to show you here.
Ellie,
yep.
Oh, sorry, just before you talk about the applications by year of birth, just with that unknown option there, because this particular client has, like Ellie said, made a question non-mandatory because it is an EEO question. We were talking about this internally, and what you could do is actually make the question mandatory, so you are forcing people to answer, but you can always include the option for somebody to select, I do not want to answer this, or I do not want to provide this information. So that is an option that you could choose to use if you want to, and then perhaps that could help with this reporting space.
I know that we had, Ellie, a client that we worked with, and they had initially set up questions as being non-mandatory, and they ended up having a lot of holes in their data because no one was actually completing that question. So I think by having a question that is mandatory with an option of unknown or I do not want to disclose, then that sort of makes locks things down a bit tighter, and you have got a bit more valid data.
And of course, having that information there about why you're capturing it, you know, stating that you're not using it in your screening process and things like that, also encourages people to answer because they, you know, you've disclosed what you're going to use it for. It's not just a random question that they are kind of confronted with.
Great. The last chart that we've got here is one that I like because it shows very quickly what age groups are attracted to your company. It's, again, if you go back to one of the very first things I said, it's important to know why you're collecting this information and what relevance it has to do with your business. So definitely it is useful to know what age groups are attracted to your company, but have in mind that it's useful also to know what you're going to do about that if they aren't the age groups that you would like to have attracted, perhaps, or if they are, you know, just putting it out there. Now, if you do want to collect age groups or ages, I always recommend collecting date of birth information because that stays the same however long an applicant has been registered with your career site. So, for example, if I registered with your career site 5-10 years ago, I would be in a different age group now. Okay. So there's a few more slides. We'll just have a quick look at those. This is quite a cool one. And I picked this one out from a local government client, and it's showing applications received to jobs over X number of months. So what you're looking at here are the ratios by ethnicity and then by gender, if you want to bring that one up as well, Danny. And you can see across each bucket in the recruitment process. And what we can see here is some really good consistency. So by and large, the ratios remain consistent across the full process. And that reflects a robust recruitment system. Now, there's one more chart which shows us what happens if we turn the numbers in a different way. If we look at this, I've taken this chart and it looks specifically at candidates who've withdrawn from the very last stages of the recruitment process. So you can see that the proportion of declines once the candidate has been offered the job is heavily weighted by women. So, you know, there's a question. Maybe that's something that should be considered. Now, for nuts and bolts of configuration, I'm going to hand you back to Danny.
Thanks, Ellie. So just a quick slide here about configuration. So when we're talking about EEO questions within SnapHire, we're talking about our registration questions, which are actually marked as being an EEO question. So you can capture this information at different parts of the recruitment process in the system, but most commonly the EEO questions are asked as registration questions because we can use this functionality to tick on a question being an EEO question. So the screenshot in the middle here is showing you some common questions. People have a section which they call diversity or equal employment opportunities, and then we recommend that you have a blurb about why you're capturing this information and what this means to your organization. Gender, date of birth, and ethnicity are the most common. Sometimes people might only have even one of those because that's what they're wanting to capture. So when a registration question is ticked on as being EEO, it is protected by the Can View EEO Information Permission. So by default, on our all of our clients' sites, this permission is not granted. So that means that anybody who is screening, so a recruiter or a hiring manager, doesn't actually see the candidate's answers to these questions. Therefore, they can be used in your reporting, which Ellie has mentioned. And so you're not kind of buying into any bias or anything like that. So this permission can be granted to users, also like Ali mentioned. So maybe there's just one person in your organization that you're trusting to kind of analyze this information. Maybe you tick that permission on for them if you have the manage users permission. So that option is there, but our recommendation would be that you know, lots of people aren't granted this permission. The management of your registration questions is self-service within SnapHire, so you can actually manage that piece yourself. So that's not only your EEO questions, but any questions that you have set up as registration questions, you can amend, edit, and remove, and tick them on for different types of candidates, for example, internals, externals, and agencies. And this also applies for your default job questions as well, so your application questions. If there's any questions about configuring these questions, then do reach out to our client success team and we can assist you with that. There are also some kind of recordings of how to do this as well. As we mentioned before, you can actually capture the EEO information at different stages. So some organizations don't want to add this to their application forms. They just want to capture the diversity of their hires. So perhaps you could have this as a question within your onboarding bucket if you're using our SnapHire onboarding functionality. So it could just be a task there for the candidate to submit that information back to you when they're completing their other onboarding tasks. Because they're already being hired, you're not using that in any kind of screening. So it's just for reporting purposes, or perhaps sending on to payroll or something like that. We did have a chat come through before, so maybe I just look at that.
Yeah, no, I was looking at that one too, Danny, and it was around question options regarding ethnicity.
Yeah.
But I was actually going to throw that one back to you because I wasn't sure where in the process these question options were being considered added.
Yeah,
and what answers were wanted in this respect either, because it all kind of gets, all makes a difference.
Yeah,
Kylie, sorry.
Registration questions. Cool. So Kylie has asked, have you updated your question options around ethnicity? As when asked for this to be included, the layout maybe they wanted to be kind of improved. So I'm not 100% sure around maybe kind of what you'd like to see in this space, but most commonly with the registration questions, we do use multi-choice single select or multi-choice multiple selection questions so that candidates are given a set of selections that they can tick on, so it's just quite quick and easy to use. As Ali mentioned, with regards to ethnicity, for example, it would be good to ask for maybe the ethnicity that they mostly identify with, so that helps with reporting, but you could have an additional question for your kind of second and third if you wanted to as well. Date of birth, as Ali mentioned as well, it's better if this is not age ranges or age groupings, but rather the candidate actually just giving you their date of birth. So that is just a simple date field within SnapHire. And then gender, again, maybe multi-choice, multiple kind of selections question type, so that you can add in options like female, male, gender diverse, or even an option to say, I would like, or I identify as, or I would like to be known as, or my gender is this, and then that enables you to add a prompt in there where they can type in their own answer. And then of course you can include the option there for them to select that they don't want to disclose this information at all.
I think, Danny, what I would say is that, this is a moving target, if you like, and we seek to work with our clients as close as we can so that we can manage what their requirements are in the best way possible. And again, coming back to the fact that all of our clients have different ways of doing things, it's a little bit hard to completely answer this as in a generic format.
Yeah. So if we're open to having any kind of, additional discussions around this. If anyone has any other questions about configuration or anything at all, do feel free to chat them through or use the Q&A option. We are now going to step into some client examples. So I'll just go to the next slide. So this is client A, who collects some diversity information within SnapHire. So they have chosen to capture this information at the application stage. As we said, this is the most common place. This includes gender. So they have chosen the options of female, male, and non-binary. So that's just what this client has chosen to do.
What's really interesting around this is that they have some minimum diversity requirements for their interviews. So they have a requirement for a minimum of 40% female, 40% male, and 20% any gender for those interviews. From my perspective, I don't know if everyone would agree with this being the best approach for every individual's business, but for them, this is something that they really wanted to investigate further. So they then use the hired information as a measurement of the diversity across their hires and whether the interview quota has resulted in positive change for them. This business has only implemented this sort of side of reporting in the last 6 months, I'd say. So we're still waiting to see on the impact and if they're going to make any further changes to that process. But we thought that it was a really interesting client to just share their approach with you because I think it's not something that we probably come across every day.
Agreed. Just before we move on to the next client example, we've just had a question come through that Sarah has asked, does this information then display on the candidate's application form for the manager to see? So with the registration questions, they wouldn't see it because they aren't granted the Can View EEO information permission by default, unless somebody with the managed user's permission has given that to them, which we wouldn't recommend. If the information was captured at a later stage, then say, for example, at interview, so maybe you're capturing information from that point onwards, or even at onboarding, for example, then we don't have to display that information to any particular user. So we can hide that action history from recruiters, we can hide it from hiring managers. So that's just a setup piece that we would talk to you about if you were to add it in at another stage. I hope that answers the question.
And I know for the client A example, they have it where the managers can't see the gender information, but the recruiters can, and they work with them in consultation around setting up those interviews.
Cool. So just move on to the client B.
So this is a different client example as well. So they have only really been looking at things within the last 6 months. They are collecting information at application stage, and that includes gender and ethnicity information. They were the client that I mentioned earlier, where they started collecting some information and didn't have mandatory questions. And after a little while, we reviewed their data and it wasn't conclusive, so that we've changed those questions to be mandatory to make sure that they are getting some more usable data. So over the last six months, the data has been used to compare the application profile versus the hired profile. So like that example that Ali showed you with the graphs earlier, are the mix of ethnicity, gender, reflective of those applications versus those hired, or if there's any bias coming through in there, or is there unfair disadvantage. I know for this client as well, they work in a male-dominated industry, so for them it's quite important to bring through a diverse gender, and especially into those technical, typically male dominated roles. So I think for this client, they are going to be making some key decisions sort of moving forward in the next few months with this information, and that will really form a clear strategy for them on how they go out and target those sort of minority groups and getting them into their business.
I think this is a really, really good example. And with the comparison between application versus hired profiles, if you weren't wanting to make these questions mandatory for application, then within our onboarding portal, we can get candidates to reconfirm their details. So again, give them another opportunity to update those registration question answers, or even answer them if they haven't done so before. So there's that piece there as well, and then you can get them to confirm their details. So hopefully then from a reporting perspective, you have more candidates, or at least your hired people, all answering those questions.
And I'm going to jump in there because I only learned that was a loop that we have within the SnapHire process itself that allows us to use the same question, same answers in those double places. So it doesn't need to be a completely new question, which always brings in the risk of having different answers at one point to another point.
Definitely. Cool, so I'll go on to the next slide. So in this slide, we're just talking a little bit about advertising. So we kind of recommend looking at your advert text, making sure that they're not maybe I don't know, not readable for some people, or they're not swaying to a particular gender. So here are some examples of some masculine words versus feminine words. So maybe you could kind of think about that when you're writing your advert text. And also, what is the readability of your advert text? Are you actually unconsciously maybe discriminating against some people even applying because they can't understand your advert text? Or perhaps you want to look at using an add-on on your careers website like Userway. So there are some government organisations and other organisations that we have that have started using Userway, which is a free add-on on your careers website for people with disabilities. So this could be somebody who is blind, for example. You can use Userway to actually get the system to read the advert text so they can listen to it. And there's different options there as well to make things kind of bigger. So it's just something to look at if you want to add, and it's free, so why not? You could also look at adding a Google Translate option on your careers website. So if you want to enable candidates to view your careers website in a different language, then that can be added on there as well. Within our profile piece within SnapHire, you can ask candidates to indicate what their title is, so Mr., Mrs., Doctor, or perhaps MX if you wanted to. So maybe thinking about whether or not you need to include those and what options you are asking of candidates. And then also personal pronouns. Do you want to capture this? Do you want somebody to identify what their personal pronouns are? We've seen this a lot online, specifically LinkedIn and Instagram. I've actually seen it recently. So maybe that's something you want your candidates to type in and indicate to you. So just some ideas there. Anything to add on that, Nat or Ali?
No, my only thought would be on the personal pronouns. You could, as a recruiter or a hiring manager, have that set up on your signature as well, if that's something that you wanted to do, or if that's something in your business that's quite standard.
Good idea. And if you don't know how to update your signature within SnapHire, then it's against your account tab within the system. But if you need any help, we can help you with that. So the next slide, we're looking at some marketplace partners. So these are just some partners that we have within our SnapHire marketplace that you could consider using.
So the first one is Predictive Hire, and we have a few clients who are using this currently. And what it does is it has an AI chat function that allows all candidates that apply to the role to go through that AI chat function. It also gives all candidates an opportunity to be, I guess, heard, and a specific report sort of provided back to them with tips around the conversation, and maybe where they can improve from an interview sort of from an interview. So I think what this does offer is that every candidate gets an opportunity, rather than having that initial bias around screening. For predictive hire, they typically focus on those volume roles, specifically sort of customer service, contact center. So that's where they sort of target, but I think it's a really interesting product, and something that I think we'll see more of our clients using. And the second one is Fluent IQ. So they have a product where they look at the candidates' English communication skills. And I think that's a really interesting one, because there's a lot of bias around, is someone's communication skills, are they strong skills? There's assumptions made around potentially people's last names, and assuming that just because they have XYZ last name, that they have strong communication skills. So it's again taking away that bias and putting candidates through that testing to get a clear outcome of those communication skills. So that might be really suited for a role, written communications, or customer facing, contact center, those sorts of roles as well.
I remember, Nat, I remember hearing more about this, with the argument being that New Zealand is such a diverse population nowadays that we need to be looking outside of that little box that we may have looked outside. 10 years ago, we may have looked at that little box, but if we need to find people to fill the roles that are needing to be filled, we need to get a lot wider, a lot smarter. And this was a tool where they were supporting that.
Breaking down the barriers.
Yeah, just broadening that net without those preconceived notions of this is potentially a better person than that person, or, it's just, no bias hiring. It made so much sense.
Awesome. Well, this is what we have had kind of to go over today. So we are open to any questions. Hopefully that's given you a good overview of what we can do in the diversity space within SnapHire. Happy to answer any questions. We've also, we're just going to launch a quick poll, if you don't mind participating, about what you might like to see in the next diversity webinar which we host, which will probably be in the second half of the year. So if you can participate in that, then that would be great.
I've got the poll tune up in front of me, Danny, but it says I'm not allowed to vote.
Oh, sorry.
Good to know what everyone else can see.
No, it's all good. I think the other thing to highlight too is, it's becoming more and more and more important that we do this well. And we deal with people every day who are doing this in one way or another. And if you would like any level of assistance in this journey, please do get in touch with us, because we know we can help.
And I think taking that on board, Ali, I often talk to a lot of clients who don't know where to start, that it seems like it's a too big a task, that they don't have the time or the resources to really put into it. And I think the recommendation is just start collecting a little bit of data, because it takes time to build that data up, and to check in and make sure that the data that's coming through is what you're wanting. So if you can start by collecting some information, then maybe looking at a report after 6 months or so, and then you can start making a decision. So it's not something that you need to do all at once, have this big diversity policy set. It's just taking those little steps, which may be able to give you some snippets of information in a direction of where you want to move.
I think that's huge, to be fair, because I get a lot of questions from clients saying, oh, tell me, what's my gender breakdown at this point? It's just like, okay, well, you tell me, will you collect gender? And they go, we don't. So, okay, that's going to make it really hard for me to give you a report. So yeah, put the little steps in place, and that's the easy bit, really.
Cool, thank you. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for participating in the poll. I'll leave it open for a little bit longer in case the last few of you want to participate. But it is, yeah, good to see what you'd be interested in the next diversity webinar. We also will be sending out the recording of this webinar for your reference, and there is a survey as well if you want to give us any other feedback about this webinar or others, or what other kind of webinars you'd like to see in the future. We appreciate your feedback. Again, if you want to ask any questions, feel free to fire them through now.
I think that's us, Danny.
Yes, not many questions today.
Cool.
I just did also want to mention that we will be having another webinar on the 18th of March, which is focusing on employment branding, talking about career site, and ways to promote your organisation, looking at sort of features on the career site, some examples of career sites that we've recently built, and all of the features and functions around that. So you will be getting a notification if you haven't already that that's coming up, and hopefully if you can, you'll join.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.